Welcome to the first digital art time-lapse of the year, which just so happens to be the longest one yet, because in this video, I won't just be showing you the process of making one digital artwork like I usually do, but today I'll be showing you how I made 5.
Now usually when I make art, I jump right into creating the outline, but I wanted these artworks to be so unique you won't find it anywhere else. To achieve that, I took a bunch of photos I needed and arranged them the way I wanted. Once all the photos have been arranged, I started creating the outline of each character. Now in case you don't already know this, I create the outline of each character by inserting shapes like ovals and circles for the curved lines, squares and triangles for the straight lines, and afterwards, I just erase the lines I don't need.
Once I finished the outline, I filled the Green Goblin and Sandman with green and brown paint respectively. But before I colored the 3 Spider-Men, I have to draw the details first since their suits come in multiple colors, and it'll be tricky to color everything if I don't draw the details first.
Once all the details and base colors have been placed, I added some effects like the glow on Tom Holland's suit, the motion blur on Green Goblin, and the grainy texture on Sandman. From there, I removed the black outline on Sandman before painting in the shadows and highlights with an airbrush. I did the same on all 3 Spider-Men and the Green Goblin. I also went back to Sandman to further define his facial features. Once satisfied, I brought back the claw marks on Andrew's suit and added my logo as a finishing touch. For the background of the second artwork, I took a stock photo of a tunnel in the sewers. I also took the previous artwork, turned it into an oval, and made its rim glow. This will now be the portal that connects the 2 artworks together. Next, I took a photo of the lizard, flipped it upside down, and erased the rest of the photo. I then traced the pathway and added circles for the tunnel itself, filled everything with color, and finally added an effect to make it look better.
I also added a shadow separating the lizard from the ceiling of the tunnel after creating his outline and filling him with color.
From there, I created foggy lighting at the end of the tunnel with a soft airbrush and white paint before adding shadows and highlights to the lizard.
I also made him a bit darker and bigger before nudging the portal a little to the left so the glow around it isn't blocking his face.
I made some tweaks here and there, and I also changed the background color.
Moving on to Doc Ock's mechanical tentacles.
First, I created a chain of 12 gray circles, curved them, then added 3 gray rectangles and triangles for the pincers. Once that was done, I incorporated it into the artwork I was working on, duplicating it to create 4 mechanical tentacles in total. However, as I was applying the shadows and highlights, I changed my mind and decided to keep only 2 of the tentacles, which I then repositioned. I made the tentacle on the left brighter and blurrier as it is closer to the glowing portal and further from our eyes compared to the tentacle on the right whose sharpness I increased. I also brought back the light glaring from the portal. To finalize, I tweaked the highlights and saturation levels via Photoshop Express before adding my logo to the top right corner.
This next part is basically the same scene but from another perspective. As opposed to the previous scene which we saw through Doc Ock's eyes, our point of view is now set behind Doc Ock.
Apart from changing the aspect ratio from landscape to square and copy-pasting this previous artwork, I also inserted the rear view photo of Doc Ock as my reference and erased the background from that photo as I didn't really need it. Now because I changed the aspect ratio from landscape to square, there's now this white gap in the background that I had to fill. Once that was done, I put 2 mechanical tentacles in place and created the rest of the outline. As usual, after creating the outline, I filled it in with color, erased some of the black lines, and finally added shadows and highlights, which I admittedly rushed in this one. Lastly, I turned most parts of this artwork blue, and you'll see why in just a bit. So for this next one, I painted the background blue and took a photo of Mysterio as reference to create the outline, and somewhere in the middle of this process, I incorporated the previous artwork as a reflection on Mysterio's plexiglass helmet. That artwork was blue because it reflects the blue color of the surrounding environment and the background. Again, as usual, once I finished creating the outline, I filled it in with the base colors and got rid of the black lines. This time, before I worked on the shadows, highlights, and other details, I created Electro's lightning in the background by painting some white lines, adding a jittery effect, a bit of blur, grain, and glow, after which I made the rest of the background darker. Time to add the details on the rest of Mysterio's suit using the same technique I used to create the outline. Once that was over, I filled the rest of his suit with color, replaced the black lines with the appropriate colors, and finally added the shadows and highlights wherever necessary.
Now that I've created an artwork within an artwork within an artwork, I just wish I could put this in an art museum. Oh wait, I already did that. Kinda.
Setting up the scene, I drew a rectangle and a short diagonal line to divide the canvas into 3 parts. 2 parts for the walls and 1 for the floor. I then inserted the previous artwork, resized it, and placed it on the wall in front of us. After that, I selected that same wall and added a grid onto it to make it less plain. I also added a grid to the wall on the left, but removed it later on when I changed my mind. For now though, I painted each rectangle of the grid in front of us before decreasing the grid's opacity. I painted the floor according to my liking, placed a shadow behind the painting of Mysterio, added the wall's reflection on the floor, sharpened the wall's grid, and lastly, I added the wet edge effect to the wall itself before increasing the overall brightness of the surrounding environment, which still feels a little empty. So with some black paint, I drew the Venom symbiote. I put an oval for its mouth and a couple of triangles for its sharp teeth. I used the water drop effect to help me with the highlights, especially on the areas where the symbiote was very thin. And of course, since I've added highlights, I also added a shadow using the drop shadow effect. From here, I didn't like how its head seemed too close to the floor, so I added a black oval behind its head to make it look as if its head is off the ground. I then separated its head from the black oval by manually painting white highlights on its chin. After all that, I resized the black oval and added the drop shadow effect to it to keep the overall shadow consistent. Then I added the symbiote's reflection on the floor as well.
Okay, now that that's done, I want to add a man in the foreground. But this time, I want to draw him straight from my imagination, without using a reference photo like how I did with the symbiote. From there, I added the facial features and a name tag that says Edward Brock Jr.
My next step was to place this man on the foreground of this artwork while still maintaining the viewer's focus on the painting of Mysterio and the symbiote. To do this, I made the man darker and blurred him out, excluding the name tag, which you can still read clearly if you view this photo on my website, danielthedreamer.com. After that, I added a grainy sign that reads, "In honor of Quentin Beck," before finally adding highlights to one side of the man's head and shoulder and wrapping everything up with my logo
on the top right corner. And that'll be all for today's digital art time-lapse. Once again, if you want to view all the artworks shown in this video but in the best quality possible, you can find it on my website, danielthedreamer.com, or by clicking the first link in the description box below. Thanks for watching. Hello?
Hello, Peter.
No. My name is Daniel. It's not Peter. Listen, I think you got the wrong number. Hello? Are you listening?
Listen to me now.
Welcome to the first digital art time-lapse of the Once I finished the outline, I filled the green I have to draw the details first since their suits come in multiple colors. And it'd be tricky to color everything in if I don't draw the But before I color the three Spider-Men, I have to draw the details first since their suits come in multiple colors. And it'd be tricky to color everything and it'd be tricky to color everything and it'll be and it'll be tricky. I also made him a little I also made him a bit darker and bigger before nudging the portal a little to the left so that this next part but this time I want to draw him straight from my imagination. From there I added the facial features and a name tag that reads Edward Brock Jr. And that'll be all for today's digital art time lapse. Once again, if you want to thanks for watching.